Hey guys, my name is Ryan and welcome to HitScan. We have a lot to get through in this video, so 3 quick things. We got to play Valorant last weekend. Myself and Miska in total got 60 hours plus of game time. Number 2, this video is going over all 36 abilities of the characters we've seen so far, how they work, the important interactions you need to know, lots of key information in here. And 3, if you want to see more, subscribe to the channel, turn notifications on because there's going to be a lot of Valorant content hitting over the next couple of days. If you don't want to miss it, that'd be my recommendation. Let's get started. Each of the characters are separated into 4 different roles: initiators, duelists, controllers, and sentinels. We'll be starting with the initiators first, whose core design is to create short windows of opportunity for you and your team to execute, and you do this by disrupting opponents. We'll start with the newly revealed hero Breach, and his first ability is Aftershock. You can only buy 1 charge of this ability and it costs 100 credits. You equip a fusion charge, you fire it against a wall and it does heavy burst damage to anybody that's on the other side of that wall. It pretty much one-shots an enemy if they're stood right next to the wall, but damage does fall off the further away you get from that area. This ability can do damage to yourself and your teammates. Friendly fire with guns, however, is not a part of the game. You can't shoot your teammates and kill them, but you can do damage to them with certain abilities. They do take 33% of the normal damage, as it is reduced if you hit allied targets. The second ability is Flashpoint. You can buy 2 charges of this, and each of them costs 200 credits. You fire a blinding charge through a wall that blinds all players looking at it. This is what it looks like when you are flashed by this ability, and you can see which enemies are flashed by the white effect that appears over their face. You can also flash your teammates and yourself with this ability. In regards to counterplay, there is this little icon that shows up just before the flash comes out, so you can look away in time, but the duration of you being flashed is a lot shorter. Now let's go over Breach's signature ability. Every character in Valorant has one, and for the most part they tend to be free at the start of every round. With Breach, his signature has a 35-second cooldown. Breach's signature ability is called Fault Line. It's an ability that dazes all enemies caught within its zone. Holding the E button extends the zone and you can see how far this reaches on a minimap. It goes through walls and line of sight, so you can catch a lot of people out with it. This is what the daze effect looks like if you're hit by it. Being dazed affects your vision, it affects your movement speed, which is reduced, and it also reduces your fire rate with all guns. The effect lasts about 3 seconds for Fault Line. This ability does no damage, however, and you can daze your teammates with this ability too. Every character has an ultimate ability. You can't buy them, you have to earn them with points, and Breach's ultimate Rolling Thunder costs 7 points to use it. You fire a cascading quake through all terrain in a large cone. The quake dazes and knocks characters up into the air that are caught within its zone. This again includes teammates. It's like a bigger, stronger version of the Fault Line ability that we just highlighted. It fires in waves, so you can avoid it to an extent, but it dazes enemies for around 6 seconds instead of 3. It doesn't, however, do any form of damage, so it's only really a stun. Now that we've gone over all of Breach's stuff, let's go on to Sova, who is the other initiator. His first ability is the Owl Drone, where you deploy a pilotable drone that flies around for about 10 seconds. And you can also fire a projectile at enemies which hit them with a tracker. The tracker does no damage, but it pulses their position 3 times, and there's nothing that they can do to remove the tracker. Your allies will also be able to see where this enemy is too. Enemies can kill the drone whilst it's flying around, and they can also kill you whilst you're flying the drone, so they'll be just stood out in the open. The next ability is Shock Bolt. You have 2 charges of this and each of them cost 100 credits, and it's a damage dealing ability. If the Shock Bolt hits an enemy towards the center of its radius, it will do about 90 damage, but on the outskirts it will drop down to about 45. Charging up the shot allows it to fly farther. You can also enable a bounce effect by pressing the right click button. Pressing it once will have the Shock Bolt bounce once. Pressing it twice, it bounces twice. This bolt, however, can do damage to you and your teammates, but like I said before, it's all reduced. Sova's signature ability is the RECON bolt. Like Breach's signature, RECON bolt has a 35-second cooldown. You fire a bolt that deploys a sonar emitter. The sonar pulses, tagging nearby enemies, causing them to be revealed for you and your team. Mechanics wise, it's the exact same as the Shock Bolt, being able to bounce it and fire it farther. The bolt pulses outwards and shows where enemies are in that second, and it pulses up to 3 times. The pulse doesn't go through walls or line of sight. You can also hide yourself with smokes and wall abilities, and the bolt can also be destroyed. If you manage to hit an enemy with the bolt itself, it does 0 damage, but it does reveal them as they move around, and there's very little that they can do about it. Finally, we have Hunter's Fury, which fires up to 3 deadly energy blasts that hit over a pretty large distance. Each enemy that's hit takes heavy damage and is marked. The energy blasts do 80 damage and they have no fall off. Regardless of whether they're stood in front of you or right at the back, they'll take that damage. The ability is also hit scan, it's an instant hit, and it can also travel through walls and terrain. You can see the effective range of this ability on the minimap before you use it. Like I said, it marks enemies, it shows where they are for you for 1 second, where it's only visible for you, so you can line up the other shots if you want. But the trajectory of this ability is visible to the enemies, so it can be avoidable for them. That's it for all of the initiators so far, let's move on to the duelists. Duelists excel in gunfights, they put their bodies on the line and they tend to have selfish abilities that are quick enough to use during combat to enable kills. We'll talk about Phoenix first. His first ability is Blaze. He has 1 charge of it available and it costs 200 credits. You cast out a flame wall that blocks vision and also damages anybody passing through it. This of course includes enemies and also allies, but they take reduced damage. The fire effect actually heals you as Phoenix if you're low on health, but you aren't healed by an enemy Phoenix's stuff or vice versa. You can actually bend a wall and make it go in certain directions. Whilst you're casting, flicking the camera to either side will bend the wall that way. Phoenix's second ability is CURVEBALL. You have 2 charges of this, each of them costing 100 credits. You cast a curving flare that bursts into light, which blinds all looking towards it. It's a flashbang. Left click curves it to the left hand side, right click curves it right. You can't just send it straight forward, so you're better off using it around corners and terrain. It doesn't do any damage and you can flash yourself and allies too. Like Breach, the flash effect is the exact same, both for experiencing it and how it looks to other players. And like Breach, you can look away from the flashbang to have a reduced effect. Phoenix's signature is Hot Hands. Like previous signatures that we've highlighted, you get this ability for free at the start of every round. But duelists, like Phoenix and Jet, do have a different requirement to use those abilities again in a round. Instead of a cooldown like we had for Breach and Sova, you unlock these abilities again once you get 2 kills. Let's say you use Hot Hands, the ability gets used up, you then kill 2 enemies, you'll be able to use that ability again. Hot Hands is essentially a Molotov. You throw it down, it hurts enemies, it hurts allies that stand in it too, and like Blaze, it heals you if you're low on health. And the ultimate is Run It Back. You only need 6 points to charge up the ultimate, and when you use it, you mark your current location. If you die during the ability's duration, you'll be reborn at the marked location with full health. This also includes when the ability's duration naturally expires, you'll be pulled back to where you were when you activated the ability. If you have armor and die, you come back without that armor, but if you had armor and you don't take damage or take a little bit of damage, that previous armor will not be taken away from you, that won't be affected. So let's move on to Jet. Jet's first ability is CLOUDBURST. You can get up to 3 charges of this ability and each of them cost 100 credits. It's a quick fire smoke grenade that instantly blooms when it hits an object. If it hits a wall, it'll bloom there. If it hits the ground, it'll bloom there. You can also curve the smoke into certain directions by holding the C button and moving your camera to curve it around walls or put it in cool positions. Jet's second ability is Updraft. You can get up to 2 charges of this and each of them cost 200, so it's quite expensive, and it hurls you up into the air. It's good for getting over obstacles like walls and stuff, or just getting to certain high ground to catch people out. She does have a passive however, and that is Glide. When you're jumping from high ground, you can hold space and you'll glide to the ground without taking any form of fall damage. When you're gliding down, it still makes sound so the enemies can hear you do it, and you also step when you hit the ground so it's not completely silent. Just as an addition to that, when you're shooting whilst hovering, your aim is inaccurate, much like it would be if you were jumping in the air. Jet's signature ability is TAILWIND, where you can dash in any horizontal direction. It's similar to Phoenix's signature. You use the ability, then when you kill 2 enemies in a round, it resets it, free to use again. It's a great ability for closing distance, but do bear in mind that there is a bit of a delay between using TAILWIND and then firing, so be careful if you're dashing into people. Jet's ultimate is called Bladestorm. Like Phoenix's ult, you only need to get 6 points in order to use it. You arm yourself with several deadly throwing knives, 5 to be exact, that deal moderate damage and kill on headshot. There's no fall off damage on these knives too, so you can get some pretty sick shots onto people. Scoring a kill restores all daggers. If you only have 1 left, you kill somebody with it, you get all 5 back. Left click throws a single dagger at a time, or you can right click, which throws all remaining daggers in a short ranged burst. The right click does have random spread when you fire it however. Just as a bit of trivia as well, you are fully accurate with the knives whether you're running, jumping or hovering down, unlike firing normal guns. weapons. The duelists were very easy to explain, so let's move on to the next section of characters, the controllers. These characters shape the battlefield and provide other forms of support, and we'll start with Brimstone. Brimstone's first ability is the Stim Beacon. You can carry 2 charges and each of them cost 100 credits. You throw the beacon down on the ground, and if you stand within its radius, you will have increased fire rate and reload speed whilst you're in that area. The effect also carries over for about 4 seconds after you leave the zone too, so you can pass on through and still have the effects. The Stim Beacon does last on the ground for a good amount of time but does eventually disappear, but be warned, enemies can use your stim packs and vice versa. Brimstone's second ability is Incendiaries. You have 1 charge of these and they cost 200 credits. It's a Molotov basically. The only main difference is that this Molotov bounces before deploying. It doesn't explode directly on contact with the ground, it will always bounce first. It damages everybody that stands in them. Brimstone's signature ability is the Sky Smoke. You get a free Sky Smoke at the start of each round, and if you want more, you have to fork out 100 credits for each of them, and you can carry up to a maximum of 3 Sky Smokes. When you press the ability, it opens up this UI map. You click where you want the smokes to go and you right click to deploy. You can deploy all 3 smokes together if you want, or 1 at a time, it really doesn't matter. The smokes also are some of the biggest and have the longest duration out of all of the smoke abilities in the game, and you can even place them onto high ground if you get the positioning right. And finally, his ultimate is Orbital Strike. This costs 6 points. You use your map to target a location, like the Sky Smokes, and then you launch a devastating Orbital Strike that pulses high damage over several seconds in that area. The UI gives you a bigger range than the smokes have. The ability goes through roofs and also line of sight. The trajectory of this ability is visible to enemies so they can move out the way, and be careful because you could take damage from your ultimate and so can your team. The second controller is Omen. The first ability is Shrouded Step. You have 2 charges of this and each of them cost 100 credits. After a delay, you teleport a short distance. You can aim where you want to teleport. The enemies can hear you use this ability, but they hear the sound from where you teleported from and not 2. Paranoia is the second ability. You only have 1 charge of this and it costs 200 credits, where you send out a shadow in a straight line and it nearsights anybody that it touches, including allies. This ability travels through walls and other parts of the map. This is what it looks like to be nearsighted, self-explanatory, you can't see right ahead of you. This effect lasts about 3 seconds, and this is how it looks on enemies when they're hit with nearsightedness. There's no other indication like a sound effect that plays when the Paranoia ability hits. If you're in the way of this ability hitting you, this warning icon comes up so you can move out the way if you really need to. Omen's signature ability is Dark Cover. You get 2 charges of this ability for free. You cast out a big orb that bursts into a smoke at its final location. It travels through the map and blooms in the position that you place it, and you can see exactly where you want to plant it on the minimap. You also have a little bit of a height icon, so if you're aiming it up in the air, you can get it onto high bits of ground instead of beneath it. A cool thing to add with the smoke is that it's hollow inside, so you can hide in it. Omen's ultimate is from the shadows, where you can basically select anywhere on the map and teleport there. There is a bit of a channel time using the ultimate, and if you're killed whilst channeling the ability, you're booted back to where you started from, and your ultimate gets used up. You can be killed after this channel is done though, so be careful that you don't spawn in a really bad spot. And it's even more dangerous when you consider that enemies will hear you teleport if you land close by. So you really got to pick carefully where you want to teleport to. The final controller is Viper. The first ability is really straightforward. It's called Snakebite. You have 2 charges of it and it's 100 credits each. It's a Molotov ability but acid. It explodes on impact with the ground, does damage to the enemies of course, but does damage you and your teammates. The second ability is Poison Cloud, where you throw down an emitter, which when activated blooms into a acid smoke. If you want to change where you place the Poison Cloud, you can pick up the emitter and put it somewhere else if you want to, and you can turn the Poison Cloud on and off with a brief cooldown, but it does eat away at a resource that I'll highlight in a second. That's because the next ability, Viper's signature Toxic Screen, also uses this resource. Viper gets this ability for free at the start of every round, and you deploy a long line of gas emitters that you can turn on and off to create a tall wall of toxic gas. These emitters will carry on for a good amount of distance or until it hits a wall, but you can also fire it over buildings to go through terrain by aiming your reticle above what you want the toxic screen to go over. You can see generally where the toxic screen should be going based off the minimap. And much like Poison Cloud, you could toggle this ability on and off by using toxic fuel. The main thing about this ability though is once you place it down, you can't pick it up and redeploy it in the same round. Where you place it is where it stays. Definitely use and place it wisely. How long the Poison Cloud and Toxic Screen abilities stay up for is dependent on your toxic fuel gauge at the bottom. Using Poison Cloud or Toxic Screen depletes your fuel. When the fuel hits 0, these abilities naturally turn off. When you're not using these abilities, your fuel will recharge over time, but if you use both these abilities at the same time, your fuel will deplete at twice the speed. We also need to talk about the debuff Decay. If a character stands in a decaying area, their armor and health gradually drops down to 1 HP. Once they leave that area, their health restores back up to where it used to be. This includes your allies who are decayed at a much slower rate. This effect applies to the Poison Cloud, the Toxic Screen, and Viper's ultimate Viper's Pit. It costs 7 points that you need to get, and you emit a massive toxic cloud in a large area. Any targets within that area will start to decay, but they'll also be highlighted to Viper with this effect if she sees them within the pit. Viper is the only one that sees them like this, other allies don't. The zone lasts infinitely as long as Viper stays within the cloud. If she leaves, she has a little bit of a UI that pops up telling her to get back inside, and if she doesn't, the Viper pit will just drop down. Same if she dies. Now we move on to the final role, the Sentinels. These are the more defensive agents within the game. They reinforce held territory and are excellent for protecting flanks and reinforcing weak positions on a map. The first character we're going to highlight is Cypher. His first ability is Trapwire. He has 2 charges of this and they each cost 200 credits. You place a tripwire between 2 walls. When an enemy passes through it, they are restrained to where the tripwire is. They're revealed on the map to the Cypher and are dazed if they fail to destroy the tripwire in time. Enemies could destroy the trap by shooting either side of the ability. Doing so will remove the restrain and avoid them being dazed. But enemies can also destroy the tripwire preemptively. They can do this by getting close to the tripwire. It will reveal it for the enemies, and they can take it down the same way by shooting either side. They can only do this if they're moving slowly though. If an enemy is running full pelt, the enemy will not see the tripwire preemptively. If Cypher's not happy with where he placed the tripwire, he can pick it up again and reuse it somewhere else. His second ability is Cyber Cage. You toss out a remote activation trap that doesn't do anything until it's deployed. When it's deployed, it turns into this nice cyber barrel that slows enemies that pass through it. It makes a noise if they go in and out of it. And after a short duration, the trap is then used up and you can't use it again. You can pretty much activate this ability across the entire map. You just hover over where it is. Cypher's signature ability is the SPYCAM, where you place a remote camera. You can place it pretty much anywhere on the map, and when you activate this ability, it will show you the video feed of what the SPYCAM is seeing. You can even move the camera around, giving you some nice intel. That's not all though. If you see an enemy with your SPYCAM, you can left click to fire a tracking dart that reveals where the enemy is. This will do so indefinitely until the enemy physically removes the dart from them. An enemy cannot see where the SPYCAM is unless the Cypher is using it or 1 second after they are finished using it. And of course the SPYCAM can be destroyed, which will be reusable again for Cypher after a 35-second cooldown. This cooldown also applies when you pick up the SPYCAM and want to place it somewhere else. Finally, his ultimate is Neural Theft. After you kill an enemy, you can extract information from their corpse. It shows the enemy player outlines throughout the map, and you can also see where they are on the minimap too. This lasts for about 1 second. The last character, but certainly not least, is Sage. The first ability is Barrier Orb, which you only get 1 charge of and it costs 300 credits, where you create a massive wall. You can rotate the wall around and you can put it about 5 meters ahead of you at most. You have to be fairly close in order to place it down. The wall is fairly thick, you can stand on it, you can use it as a constructible to get over certain objects or onto other bits of high ground for example, and the only way that it can be taken down is if it's destroyed. It also has a fairly long duration, like 30 seconds or so, with how long it stays up for. But as time goes on, the wall starts to decay, meaning that it takes less damage to destroy it. The second ability is the Slow Orb. You get 2 charges of this and each of them cost 100 credits. You cast out an orb that breaks into a slowing field upon impact with the ground. All targets, that includes you and your allies, are slowed 70% of their movement whilst in the slow orb. You'll have your jump height reduced, and you will also make a lot of noise when you're moving. This includes when you're sneaking too. Sage's signature is Healing Orb. It has a 35-second cooldown. You heal an ally or yourself to full health over a few seconds, and you have to be fairly close to a target to heal them. You can't do it across the map. The final ability is fairly straightforward to describe. It's Resurrection, it's her ultimate, and it costs 7 points. If a teammate of yours dies, you can run up to them, fairly close mind you, to resurrect them with full health. And that is the final ability that we've highlighted in this video, 36 different abilities. If you want more Valorant, like and subscribe, turn the bell notification on. It matters a hell of a lot for YouTubers, so I'd appreciate it. Thanks for watching, take care, see you then.